everybody, welcome to the Dad Challenge podcast. Today we're going down a little bit of a different path, something I want to start bringing back. You guys have heard me talking, little inklings of changing my content a little bit. You know, I'm always going to stick to the family vlogging thing. I think we've done some pretty awesome things there together. And so far it's been amazing, but at the same time, I don't want to sound like a broken record, and I have a lot of other shit I want to talk about. You guys tend to like when I talk about modern church, where I come from, exposing it, talking about it, and you know, we did the Mormon series. I've done a couple things on ex-pastors, and so I'm going to bring that back today. Today we're going to talk about something called worship wars. And anybody who's ever been in ministry knows what I'm talking about. Specifically, if you've been in worship ministry in a church. Worship wars are exactly that. It's the war between the worship team or worship leader and the congregation and the world and the thing as a whole. And it's actually a pretty crazy world if you live in it. I'm going to expose it a little bit today, talk to you about what it is, how it works, and is it good, is it bad, all that stuff. It's going to be fun. You guys want to stick around for this episode because this was my life for 10 years as a professional worship pastor. And it was honestly awesome and shitty. And we're going to talk about it today. You're going to love it. So stick around. Before we do that, everybody, you know I'm just going to do some chair dancing today. I'm going to save my good dancing for Fridays. But today, this one's for the YouTubers.
Yeah, baby.
Hey! Elia! Hey, Elia! Finally got one. She's always giving great comments in the chat. All right, what are you gonna win? What are you gonna win? Come on, win something big. Get a shirt, get a shirt, get a shirt, get a shirt, get a shirt. Yes, I think you win a shirt. Yeah, hell yeah. I think you're the second person to win a shirt. That is excellent. Admin at thedadchallengepodcast.com. Ames will send you a shirt. Patreons, let's see if we can do it twice. Come on. Cindy Myers, win something big. Come on, come on, come on. Get a shirt, get a shirt, get a shirt, get a shirt. Look at it, look at it. 2 shirts today. You guys are making me broke. I'm gonna be broke. It doesn't matter. I love it when people win shirts because those are the best things. Let's go. So this is me at church in 2018, January, it's after Christmas, doing a song called We Are Royals. I'm not going to play the whole thing, it's going to get copyright striked, but I just wanted to show you what I did at my church, just so you guys know I'm not like a faker. I did what I did. Come on, get it. We are under. Gotta point out, this is my boy Curtis in the back. He's my drummer. If I ever go on tour, if his wife lets him, he's gonna come. He's the best drummer I've ever played with, and I've played with some drummers. He's good because he knows how to play the volume. He doesn't crush it, but he's got like it down pat. You love him. Paul, he's so good. That's Victor on the keyboard. Victor was so good. The guy, his mom made this Portuguese stew. Oh man, I loved it. I'm showing you guys this because I wanted to show you guys how passionate I was about what I did. Got another video here. I really want to show you. I want to point out another song I did because when it comes to worship wars, we're going to talk about the idea of styles. And so I want to show you guys a modern worship song and then a song of me taking like a hymn and turning it into a modern song. I was a worship pastor that was inclusive, meaning that I was not afraid to do hymns, old school songs, new school, whatever it was, but I was always creative the way I did it. I'm showing you this because I'm halfway showing off, but at the same time I wanted to show you something really cool and how badass this was.
Then I shall bow in humble adoration and then proclaim.
Listen, ready? Get ready. God, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God to thee. right, sorry. I get pumped. The one, you know what? I just had a moment there. I'm not gonna lie. I had a bit of a moment, and I miss that so much. I miss that worship. I miss getting up on stage, leading people in music and worship, and it was like, to me, it was real too. Don't get me wrong. Like, I know I don't go to church anymore. I'm pretty anti-religion as it is right now, but that was real for me, and still is to this day. I still put on the music. I still try to listen to still worship. And it's real to me. But at the same time, when you are when you are a worship pastor, man, it can get really hard. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Just wanted to show you that stuff. Oh man, I get moved. Not because I'm seeing myself, but at the same time, it's like, I loved what I did and I thought I was pretty good at it. First of all, for those of you who don't know, modern church is way different than it used to be back in the days. Okay, even since I was a young boy who grew up in church starting at 12 years old to now, has come leaps and bounds and millions and trillions of dollars later of what church is now, okay? What has changed mostly is that it's modernized itself, it's got better technology, and the music has exploded, and it is so good. Oh my gosh. I know I hate Hillsong, I know I hate Elevation, I know I hate like Bethel and all those places, but their music is so good. It cannot be denied that most of the people that come into these places, worship leaders to write these songs, they aren't the ones perpetuating the shitty behavior in these churches. It's generally the pastors. Sometimes it is the worship leaders though, but for the most part, it's not. Like you've got Elevation, Hillsong, Bell, all those people who write the music, I kind of separate them from the church, even though they're under their umbrella. And I know there is some shitty behavior that goes on. We're going to talk a little bit about today as far as worship bands are concerned and the money that's made in it. But for the most part, here's the one thing I will say before we get started. For the most part, worship music is written in honor of God. It is meant to be a place to come and worship. Those words are written for God, for a congregation to come together to sing out in honor of God, right? That's what I will say that. And God, regardless of how shitty the church is, God will use that music and those messages for his glory, regardless, because nobody's perfect. We're all shitbags, every single person. And so God has to use shit and he's still glorifying. That's what I believe, okay? I say all that because, man, with Elevation and Hillsong and everything that's going on with these churches right now, they're all falling apart. It's important to distinguish what's going on. And part of what the worship wars is the music itself and what it has done to the church over these years, okay? So let's get into it. What is a worship leader in the modern sense? Now, a worship leader like I was a clergy, meaning I was a registered clergy, meaning a non-denominational church can literally just say, hey, you are a pastor, and there's benefits you get from being a pastor, okay? There are tax benefits from being a pastor. You register as clergy, you can write off 10 months of your rent. Complete write-off. I was making $5,000 to $10,000 in tax returns, okay? I was writing off something like $30,000 a year just in clergy status alone. So it is don't ever get it twisted, okay? Pastors of modern churches make a lot of money and they have massive write-offs, okay? Huge write-offs. So I was making decent money, about $60,000 a year, and I was writing off almost half of that in my taxes. So it's like I was making 90. So it's a really, really good thing to get into a modern church in this era. So a worship leader of a modern church, which is my experience, is somebody who comes in who is a musician who can run a band. You don't even necessarily have to read music. I can't. Okay, I'm not even a trained musician. I taught myself. I went to school for worship leader development, but that was it. I didn't actually get a degree in anything. Most worship leaders you see on stage, most of them don't have degrees, in modern churches anyway. Older churches would have organists and pianists and all that stuff and have music directors. Most of those older churches will require their worship director or pastor to have a music degree. Some modern churches will also require it, but that's kind of going beside the wayside because you don't need it anymore. Worship music is relatively simple to play, and nobody really needs to understand like the technical side of music anymore. It's just, music is easier than it has ever been before to do because it's simplified beyond anything. So a worship pastor comes into a church. My job was to come into a church and to modernize this worship, okay? Meaning take this worship culture and modernize it to today's style of worship, which is like Elevation, Hillsong, Bethel, all the big stuff coming out. Not only that, I was in charge of Sunday morning experience, meaning anything you saw on the stage on Sunday, I was responsible for it. Okay, and you can go watch my Why I'm an Ex-Pastor, part 1. I talk about exactly what I do and how many hours I worked, which was insane. So I was responsible for making Sunday morning pimp. And I did it well. I was very good at my job just because I'm a big dreamer and I'm very creative. But but sometimes the budget's not there, and so you got to be creative. And so that's, in the modern sense, that's what a worship leader does. Basically comes in, puts a guitar on and plays a piano, and leads a congregation in worship. They run auditions, they run rehearsals, they do tons of stuff. Generally, the larger churches with bigger budgets, a worship leader is just that, is a person who comes on Sunday, leads worship. They usually have staff galore to help them with everything else. But a worship leader of my stature, of a smaller church, is generally someone who wears 10 hats and does all the work. And so that's mostly. So all the worship bands, the big ones that you see, Elevation, Hillsong, Bethel, all the big ones, none of those worship leaders are actually, they're contracted and they're rock stars. They're not actually pastors. They're just effing rock stars, and they get paid a lot of money. I'm pretty sure Joel Houston from Hillsong Church, which is the pastor's son, by the way, is the main guy at worship. I'm sure he makes about $400,000 a year as a salary, not including all the residuals he gets from the music that gets written. So we'll talk about that soon. So it is lucrative to be a worship pastor in a modern church with a very large congregation. I was almost hired by a church in Florida for almost $100,000 to start. That was when I decided I wasn't going to go to church anymore. I didn't want to be part of church anymore, and kind of just went to the wayside. Not sure I would have gotten it, but I was in the running. I was in Orlando too. It was a sweet church, and I love that church. To this day, if I was going to stick in ministry, I would have loved to be there, and I still think that church is awesome. Anyway, so now the next part is, what is modern worship music and where did it start? So modern worship, I don't know if a lot of people who have gone to church remember back in the day around 1990s is when this thing called Jesus, I think it's called the Jesus movement. It's like Vineyard, and like all these songs came around, very, 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 very old. It was songs like Shout to the North and the South, like those old school worship songs that were like, and then the 90s kind of hit. And then we started getting into like worship music, and Christian rock started becoming more mainstream. DC Talk came out with a record. Then they came out with about 1995 is when everything started really changing, when I started getting into music anyway. DC Talk dropped their record, Jesus Freak. And it was the biggest Christian record, and one of the biggest records actually in the States. It was hugely popular. I think it was one of the first Christian records to go platinum, which is amazing for Christian music, because before that record that changed the game, before that year, everything was shit. Worship music was garbage. Christian music was garbage. It was just like garbage doesn't mean like it wasn't mainstream acceptable. Okay. Then I remember Jars of Clay dropped an album called Flood, and they went platinum, and then everything changed. So all those old school worship music and Vineyard and all those people started coming up through this church that was very, how do you say it? Like charismatic. So a lot of people were starting to do the, the shofar, the dancing with the flags and shit like that. And it was starting to come more mainstream into more churches. More churches were like, oh, we want the exciting worship, which was happening in a lot of those churches beforehand.
Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend in Jesus.
A lot of churches started adopting more and more music to start attracting who? Younger people, because the older people were dying, and they have to replenish the church. So that's what was kind of happening. So the modern worship was born out of a necessity to bring in young people. And that's basically where it's gone ever since. And so you're seeing less and less churches do the old shit, and generally those churches are full of old people who are like 1 foot in the grave, don't buy green bananas type of people, and they love it. Don't get me, there's nothing wrong with it. But then you're seeing all these modern churches who are saying, okay, now we're doing it. Now it's changed even since doing cool music to like the more tech side, which we'll get into in a second, okay? The tech is insane in worship music, okay? So I remember Sonic Flood also came out with a record, which was a Pink record. Sonic Flood, I think, was self-titled, and that also changed the game. They were bringing out all these older worship songs and turning them into rock and pop. Just a great 95 to 98, amazing year for worship music, okay? Just Delirious came out with records. Matt Redman came out. There was so much. Chris Tomlin. Everybody was just exploding. And the funniest part is that those artists that were there 20 years ago are still the number one artists today for worship, generally. Tomlin, Matt Redman, not Delirious, but Martin Smith. Like, there's still artists out today that are still touring. Like, if you've ever gone to a Christian music festival for the last 20 years, you have absolutely seen Newsboys. Okay, and I hate Newsboys. Some of their songs are cool when I was growing up because I was, because I was young. But Newsboys are still like number one on every Christian tour, and they're garbage. Worship music in church is always 10, 20 years behind, and they're still the same bands touring, and it's held by this one gatekeeper, which is Christian Music CCM, and we'll talk about that in another video. I know I'm going in, this is how my brain works. But okay, so that's what modern worship music is and when it started, okay? It was just guitar, rock-driven pop, and it was kind of emerging alongside of modern music as it was, because the music before then was set apart because they didn't want to be worldly. A lot of churches were like, oh, we don't want to do worldly music. That's a sin. A lot of churches actually believed that rock music, drums, and instruments were sinful, which is bullshit. Because Psalm says, bring the effing noise. I paraphrase, but that's what it says. So my story as it pertains to worship is, okay, so I was a young guy, went to church started going to church when I was 12. Okay. Grew up in that same church. Around the time I was 17, around the time I was 13, I moved out to New Brunswick, and I stopped going to church because there was no church. And then I moved to another small town and then started going to church again. That's when I met a youth pastor who just built into me. And it was an amazing time in my life. And it was a guy who trusted me, and he saw how poor I was. He would buy me clothes. He would take care of me. Like, he saw my life and he took responsibility for me, and I'll never forget it. He was one of the main catalysts for my faith at the time, right? So then by the time I was 16, I think I moved back to Ontario, and I moved in with my sister, and I started going back to this old church where I started going from. And eventually just moved out on my own. By the time I was 17, I was living on my own, but I was still going to this church. At that time, I had met a girl, and that was my first love. And maybe someday I'll tell you the story of my first love. It's a freaking crazy story. And that girl, I remember talking to her and youth group in general, and we were dating, like, it was the internal youth group thing, right? The solid 30 kids at the youth group, and we're all friends, and we're all like inter-dating, or we all had inter-crushes. And I found out one day she liked guys who played music, and I'm like, I don't play music. So what did I do? The next day I went and bought an Ovation guitar. Piece of shit. Okay, don't ever buy an Ovation, all right? But I did because I just didn't know. And the first song I ever learned guitar was Kiss Me by Sixpence None the Richer, which my friend Bethany showed me, and was hilarious because I'm sure she didn't play guitar at all. But that's when it all started. I started because of a girl, which is what generally boys do. So all that to say, I grew up in church, and I loved worship music, and this was like the anthem of our summer was Sonic Flood and big bands like that, and Newsboys and all those, and the Christian music festivals we all went to. That was our anthem. Those were our songs, and we loved them. We held them dear, and they were very nostalgic. And today, if I listen to them, it's still super nostalgic. I actually have a Spotify playlist, I'll try to remember to put it below, of old school Christian music. Switchfoot. Oh man, there's so many good bands. Like, I remember Earthsuit, POD, you guys remember POD? DC Talk was a huge one. Newsboys, but they were, for a time I was growing up, it was awesome. And then I started getting into Christian ska, Christian metal. Christian music was huge, and it was making a ton of money at the time. And it became, again, the anthem of all of our summers, and like the summer of love. You're all connected through music and everything else. So I started loving music. To that point, I had never sung or played any music. So by the time I went to college, I was 20, and I had just, again, started playing music. I decided I'm going to go give this a shot. In college and university, I was an art major and a psychology minor. I wanted to be an animator because I used to love to draw. And instead, I just shit the bed at school, and I hardly went, and I just became super social. And I would do these things called dorm rounds. Okay, I would go around to every effing dorm I had friends in, which is like 40 of them, and I would bring my guitar and I would just play music for people. I played 3 hours a day, and I got really good in that first year because I played so much. So I would play music for people who were sick or for girls. I was like, I never got any girls, but they just liked me playing guitar for them, so I was like, whatever. I did what I could. Okay. Anyway, so that actually sparked a passion into worship music. So after that school year, I went back home, and I was working, and I was playing in the worship team at church, and we were garbage, but I thought we were good. But again, you have to start somewhere. So after that, I decided, okay, I'm switching schools. I'm headed to Briarcrest Bible College in Saskatchewan. And let me tell you, if you have never been to the prairies, okay, and don't go, but if you've never been, and you wake up in the prairies, you're like, what did I do? So I fell asleep in Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is all mountains and gorgeous. And then I woke up the next morning on the bus. I took a bus, which is insane. And I woke up in the prairies, and I said, what did I do? It's literally flat. Like, there's no hills. There's a tree maybe, and it's all yellow. So anyway, I say that because I went to Bible college. I wanted to do music. I took piano. I took vocals. I took songwriting. I took worship leadership development, biblical studies. It was an amazing year, and I started a band called From Dust, and we went on our first tour. We toured back to Ontario, and it was an amazing adventure. Again, I was getting pretty good at this time, but relying heavily on more talented artists, which I've always done throughout my career. I've never been the best musician in the band ever. I always rely on better musicians. That's just because I'm more of a producer and I'm more of an arranger than I am a musician. I know this is getting long. It's probably going to be 3 parts. So, all that to say, that was my foray into it. And then I started a band when I moved to Ottawa called Hearts in Stereo. We toured for like 6 or 7 years. It was an amazing experience. We have 3 records. So amazing. And a tour bus and everything. And then after that, Everly was born, and I said, okay, no more road, no more band. And I decided to get my real estate license like everybody does. So I got my real estate license, hated it. And then I said, okay, you know what? Maybe I should be a worship pastor because I get to play music and I get paid for it. And I got my first job at a very small church who I still love to this day and have friends at still. And I started implementing all these modern worship songs and learning it all and going to these conferences and all this stuff. First conference I ever went to was called the Drive Conference at North Point Church in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been to that conference 3 times and that church twice. So I've been there 5 times. I still love North Point. As I'm growing out of religion and becoming more post-Christian and, dismantling my faith and all that stuff, I probably wouldn't go, but I still am driven to that excellence of it all. So I went to that, and this is my first foray into worship wars and worship culture, okay? All right, so this is where the wars begin. You can go to a church like North Point, you've never been, even if you don't go to church, everybody, when all these churches open back up, do me a favor and go check out one of these insanely, I don't know how to say this, like profitable, expensive churches, okay? Because they're humongous. They have massive parking lots. When you walk in, there's likely security everywhere. You can never talk to the pastor. Just do me a favor, even if you don't go to church, never experience church, don't ever want to go, do me a favor. If you want to know what it's like, go to a church like North Point, Elevation, Bethel, Hillsong, or something like that. There's so many out there, and go experience it. Even if you don't even if you hate it, you probably will, but just go experience it so you can see the atmosphere that they have built in this modern era. It's like going to a U2 concert. It's mind-blowing. So, but every church is divided on what they do. And a lot of churches, specifically churches that are trying to do what the bigger churches do, there's a lot of coveting. So here's step 1 of worship wars, and it's called coveting. Now, as a younger worship leader, as somebody who had a church that didn't have a ton of equipment, didn't have all the bells and whistles, but I made it work because I was I was really good at making things work with no budget because I was in a band for 10 years, and you kind of have to do that. So when you go to these churches like North Point or Elevation stuff, you see their back end, like the behind the scenes shit, and it will blow your mind. Okay, so coveting is one of the biggest things that happens inside churches, and this is like, I'm teaching you guys how the sausage is made. So if you go to a church like North Point and you look at their board, okay, some of their boards in the back, and some of them have 2 or 3 lighting board, video board at the top, and a soundboard. And these boards can be anywhere between $60,000 to $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. They're fully automated. They have incredible it's mind-blowing how good their equipment is. And it's in like the millions upon millions of dollars, specifically at North Point, if you go check it out. They've got stacks of speakers, like it's called line arrays. They've got subs in the bottom of the stage. It's like, it's honestly concert quality audio that's millions of dollars, and it's so overkill, it's mind-blowing, okay? Their instruments on the stage are worth thousands of dollars. Like, I've got a Gibson SG back here, it's worth about $2,000. My Taylor, which you can't, it's not on the wall right now, that's about $2,000 guitar. These are things that people buy. It's more for status than anything, okay? Good equipment obviously does ring true, though. And if you go to these churches, they're all, the rooms are built like studios. They're not just, it's not like a gym, it's not echoey. They're made for pure audio, and it's gorgeous. Their projectors probably often have 5 or 6 of them. Those projectors $10,000 to $15,000, $30,000, $100,000 a piece. Now churches are doing LED walls on the back. It's just literally a giant TV on the back, worth $400,000 to $500,000, millions of dollars sometimes. So coveting comes in when us smaller worship leaders go to these conferences that these bigger churches hold, and the churches just walk you around and like, look what we have. And those people that work at those churches are totally flexing. Like, they're nice, don't get me wrong, they're really nice people, and they want to genuinely show you what to do and how to help, but like more often than not, it's just a huge flex. They're like, look what we have. And that is a big deal, and it really doesn't help. And so that was one thing that I took away from my time as a worship leader, is that I'll never be able to achieve the things that they achieve because I don't have $5 million for sound. We did what we could. When I moved to the bigger church here in my area, the one that fired me, it was a little bit bigger of a budget, but still 25-year-old speakers. I had to change the sound and try to figure it out. But we still a little bit bigger of a budget, better than most smaller churches, but still not as good as the bigger churches. It's generally like a big keeping up with the Joneses. Every church wants to do what the other big church is doing, and how do we get that? What do we buy? What do we need to do? What kind of tech do we need to get? So tech is a huge deal. Coveting is a huge deal inside worship wars. Worship leaders want what other worship leaders have. Tech directors want what other tech to check that other churches have. And these worship leaders know it, and they walk around like effing rock stars. If you ever go to these places, you often can't meet them. I remember going to one in Nashville, and Carrie Joby was sitting like over there somewhere, surrounded by security. Can't approach them, and it's not like this is a church, right? But they are famous. So we got to talk about famous worship leaders. The next step in worship wars is that famous worship leaders it's just like mega church pastors, famous pastors. It should not be a thing, and it absolutely is a huge thing. Okay, you look at Carrie Job, you look at Joel Houston, you look at all these guys who write all these big songs. It only takes you, a lot of these worship leaders will, like, they get traded around like baseball cards, like different, like it's like MLB baseball. All these churches will trade their worship leaders and just trade off and send them elsewhere and like go work with others, work with amazing writers, and they all come together. It's a multi-million dollar industry. Any worship leader that you see on a stage at these churches, they're making well over six figures. If they write music and it's music that gets played by other churches, millions of dollars. But the idolization of worship pastors, it's bullshit. It's absolutely, utterly bullshit. And we shouldn't be doing it. And unfortunately, the culture is in a way that it's about making money, and it's not really about helping anybody. So that's kind of part two. Now, when it comes to worship wars, there's another thing you have to take in consideration. When you're going into a modern church, specifically a church that might have switched into a modern era from an old way, and you still have some of the older people kind of there that were legacies, it's old music versus new music. And I wanted to show you that music at the beginning because I liked all music. I grew up on hymns, so I didn't mind them. And I love modern worship. And so I was a perfect leader for a church like this, who likes the old stuff, who still likes the new stuff. But I definitely leaned heavily into the modern stuff because that's what brought the younger people. And we were drawing in a lot of young people, a lot of young families, because I was wearing things like this. Skinny jeans, I looked cool. The band was set up, the stages were amazing, the lights, the smoke, everything. We had it all, and it was bringing in people. But where worship wars are concerned, a lot of times worship pastors are at war and at odds with the congregation, specifically the older congregation. Now, in every congregation, there's a 100-year-old lady who loves you, and she loves the music. She just wants to worship, and I love that old lady. And she's always there to help. She never complains because she worships because it doesn't matter what's being played. She's just there to worship. But that's very rare with old people. I would often get notes slipped under my door that said, you're an asshole, play hymns or I'll kill you. Didn't say that, I'm paraphrasing, but basically just said, look, you're too loud, there's too many lights, it's like a rock concert, I don't like this. And it'd be anonymous. We would have an end of year consensus where people would fill out something and talk about what they like, what they don't like. And we did it every year, and it was crazy, like a lot of great data. And not all the comments, but 10% of the comments were just like how much they hated the Sunday morning experience, whether it's the message or the music is too loud or there's too many songs we don't know, or there's always an argument between we don't know the song. So I'm like, gonna learn it then. Because it's not like we just did one song and we didn't do it. Here's how this works generally in churches like mine. You guys are gonna like this. You're getting all the inside scoop. A worship leader of a modern church introduces a new song, and this is how it works, okay? So they've got their legacy 40 songs generally that the congregation knows and loves, and it becomes the culture of your church. Those are generally theme specific, and they match your theme. There's a million worship songs you can choose from, okay? From all walks of life, old to new, all good, and you usually have 40 that you pull from, okay? Generally, in my church, the pastor would say, this is what we're going to be talking about on this day, and so here's a theme, and you thematically pick those songs to match the message. That's what we did. If you want to introduce a new song, what you do is you bring it up 1 week, you say, hey, here's a brand new song, everybody. You might not know the words, just read along, sing along as you get it, okay? You do that song once, you skip a week, don't play it, and then you play it again. Right? And then you put it on a playlist on Spotify, you put it on the social media, and people start liking it. Then you play it again, and then you take a break. And you leave it off for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then you bring it back. And that's how that song becomes a legacy. Right? And if it sticks, you keep it. So songs are literally auditioned to the audience to see what sticks and what works. And sometimes songs don't work. Okay? And you do your best to bring it, and you think like a lot of your taste. I think this is where worship leaders sometimes get hurt. I pride myself on having good taste in music. Okay, something that I've always just been good at. I generally know what songs to pick that the majority of people will like. Sometimes I did miss the mark, but it was very rare. Okay, because I was always had my ear on what's hot, what's new, what's good, what works, and I did it. And sometimes it didn't work, but most of the time it did. So the majority of our audience loved it. And we would do a lot of North Point songs, do a lot of Hillsong, Elevation. I loved Elevation. I still do love Elevation. The music, not the pastor, he's a dink. But so this is how this really works. And so sometimes there's also a war between the pastor, right, the lead, and the worship leader. And so my job was to do that. And I was like, look, they're like, you do this, we won't get in your way. And of course, they'll still get in your way. But a lot of times, the pastor, you have to submit to your leadership, and they say, look, we're not going to do that song, I'm going to do this one. And you kind of butt heads a little bit, but not a lot. So that's how new worship is introduced. But the old people who hate the new stuff will always complain. They'll never just leave the church and go to a place that they like. They still want to have all the benefits of this awesome church, but they hate your music, and they'll do this. And there are people who always want to complain, and they'll leave notes for you that are rude. They'll talk to the pastor, and they'll say things, they'll like talk behind your back. It's actually kind of crazy, and it gets really, really, really toxic. And there are some people that are pretty vocal, and it's usually the most vocal ones who have the biggest problem are generally the ones who tithe a lot. Like, they don't tithe to the Lord, they tithe for status tithers, those a-holes. Anyway, so that's part of the worship war. So as a worship leader, you're always struggling back and forth between pleasing everybody and not pleasing, because you're never going to please everybody, but you try, right? And those comments do hit. Like, in a church, you're supposed to ignore them. And generally, if someone wrote me a letter and they didn't have their name on it, I'd read it, laugh, and throw it in the garbage, right? But sometimes they would leave a comment that really hit pretty hard. Oh, I didn't like what that girl was wearing the other day. We had dress codes, couldn't show cleavage, couldn't wear tights. There is a lot of rules. And if you messed up one Sunday, like a girl wore something that she wasn't supposed to be wearing, which I didn't give a shit, wear whatever you want. Because I was like, this is a modern church, right? We would do secular songs to open up the service. We would do create Philip Phillips, we would do U2, we would do Beatles. It was a church that was pretty on the edge post-Christian. And every time we did one of those songs, you'd get so many complaints. But if a girl wore something inappropriate, you'd hear about it. And then the pastor would hear about it. And then it's, again, like the world, like Twitter, the vocal minority have huge power inside of a church. Don't ever forget that. That vocal minority, they absolutely have power, specifically if they tithe, because pastors are in the business of keeping their church funded. Don't ever get it twisted. One thing you have to do as a worship leader is research the shit out of everything. You always have to be at the forefront of worship culture, which is why we always go to the worship conferences, and we're in that. And again, that's where the coveting comes from. You always go to these places, and they always look the best, wearing a toque and a scarf in the summer in Nashville, and everybody's pimping out their shoes. You can tell the humble ones that come from small churches because they don't dress like that. But there's this. And I was part of this. This majority of them were young guys like myself when I was in my 30s, dressing the way. There was a way you dressed. There was an acceptable way to dress for modern worship culture. And it's generally for men. Men got away with way more shit. Back in the day, we were wearing deep V-necks, super tight pants. You literally could see my wang through my pants, right? Tight, everything. But women, they would wear super baggy things, and it was just in the stupid, ugly Hillsong hats, and it was definitely a culture. And so when we're staying on top of research, part of that is going to the conference, but the other part is going to Facebook groups like this one. This group is called Worship Leaders Collective, and I have beef with this group. Established in 2015. I was on this group every single day, and I just want to walk you through some of the discussions that happen on a page like this. It's very important. And I'll tell you what my beef is with this page in a minute. Okay, because it's definitely gatekeeped by somebody I don't like. Okay, so mostly it's the same damn questions over and over again. What are you playing on Sunday? What song are you doing? I live in Wisconsin. Any of your suggestions for worship conference I could attend? Hey friends, any fellow worship leaders in Wisconsin? Wisconsin needs worship leaders apparently. I almost got hired in Wisconsin once. Hello, my fellow worship leaders. I want to thank each of you that responded to my post about struggles with the leadership of my church. A lot of people come here to vent, right? But you're not really allowed to vent. You're allowed to say certain things, but they will not allow dissent on this page, right? So if you were to type in anything about Sean Foyt right now, who is a complete and utter a-hole in the worship scene, or the fact that Hillsong is falling, basically he's got a warrant out for his arrest in Australia for hiding the fact that his dad abused children. It's crazy. Hillsong's going to fall. But if you were to type something like that in this page to talk about as worship leaders, here's what's important to me. If we're going to be playing these worship songs from these churches, why are we not allowed to talk about the shittiness that they do? And Can we do those songs if they're coming from a church that is literally mired in sin, right? They won't let you post shit like that. No. You can't actually talk about being a worship leader. You're only allowed to come here and talk about what they want you to talk about. Hey everyone, what kind of questions would you ask that are suitable for hiring holy worship leader? Questions, but I wanted to go to the about section here because it's really important to read this. So the rules of this group are like there's 33,000 members in this group, which is huge, okay? And I was a very vocal member of this group. Lots of people get kicked out because people want to talk about things that are important to us as worship leaders. Here's one thing you need to know about before I read the rules. Every worship leader or pastor of a church needs a place to go vent with other like-minded individuals in the same walk of life. It is one of the most important things to have as a worship pastor. Locally, I have a lot of pastors we talk a lot about you need to vent. I know that sounds stupid that you need to go a place to go vent because churches are bullshit. Churches are full of bad leadership decisions, are full of bad people, are full of like hardships, a lot of pastors are super overworked and are super unhappy because generally the churches are led by one single a-hole who is like, this is me. It's all about me, 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 me. And that's generally the lead pastor, okay? So there's always terrible leadership. There's always people not pulling their weight. And so worship pastors and pastors specifically need a place to vent. And this page with 33,000 worship leaders in it should be that place. It should be a safe space to say, hey, I'm struggling with this, or this is something I need to vent about, and they will not let you. And okay, that's their rules. But it never was their rule until recently because they became a place that is one of the gatekeepers for worship music. And we'll talk about that, what that means. I guess we'll talk about it right now. So worship music is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And this page, which is the biggest worship leaders page called Worship Leader Collective, is a gatekeeper. And they make sure that you don't ever talk anything bad about anybody in the worship world because they are connected to it very deeply. They are a gatekeeper. There should never be anything like gatekeeping when it comes to Jesus music, when it comes to music that's honoring of God. And this place is a gatekeeper. I wrote a post a long time ago, and I look back on it now, it probably wasn't the best post to make. I think I said something like, I don't like going to these concerts and listening to female worship leaders who are completely fake. And it was there, I got ratioed because I went to a Carrie Joe concert and I was like, this is bullshit. I don't like it at all. Again, they gatekeep the shit out of that stuff and cut it right off and kick you right out. And that's fine. Now that I have a bigger platform, I can spill my beef. But the reason I say that is because maybe I deserve to be reprimanded or just say, take the post down. Please don't talk like that. That's not smart here. Maybe I was wrong, but I don't think I was. Because worship culture is very, very crazy. So they always say honor for God and one another is essential. A community, we are devoted to one another, spirit of honor, fear of the Lord, blah, blah, blah. Gratitude and love. Post messages or emails deemed as dishonorable will be automatic removal from the group. And they are the gatekeeper of what's dishonorable. So they'll say, oh, I don't like you talking about Sean Foyt, kicked. I don't like you talking about what's going on at Hillsong, kicked. Oh, what's going on at Elevation, kicked. Gone. They are the gatekeepers. No debating or questioning song lyrics, which I think is utter and absolute bullshit because some song lyrics need to be debated. Okay? And they need to, this should be the safe place to do that. Where else can you do that? And they'll just say, go somewhere else. But this is the main page. And so they're gatekeeping for CCM, for Christian music. They are the gatekeepers where if someone has a dissenting opinion on one of the most popular pages where they all gather, they shut that shit down and kick you out of the page. Okay? Check your opinions at the door. You're not allowed to have opinions. We have zero tolerance for opinions when it comes to churches, preachers, and differing views on theology. Churches, preachers. So, if you have a problem with somebody, this is not the place to talk about it. Even though those theological arguments and debates are really important to us. Because we're immersed in church. And so when we come up with something, it's amazing to come across 33,000 other people and ask for advice, debate healthily, and have a conversation about it. Not a lot of opinions on this page. And so one of the big problems with worship wars is that you don't have any place to go because it's all gatekeeped. And there are smaller pages that I started my own called Worship Leaders Collective X because I'm like, I'm doing my own page. And I'm pissed because as pastors, if you have no place to vent and this worship war is going on around you, it all gets bottled up and pent up, and then eventually people just lose the passion for it and they leave. I'm not saying this page is responsible for that, but if you're not allowed opinions on a place where you should be able to have opinions and talk about things that are important to worship leaders, what's the effing point? And again, the reason is because it's gatekeeped. And who's the person? Her name, okay, and so and it's a husband and wife team, Jenny and Jake McGrew. Okay, they're lead pastor and pastor at Hope City Church, and they grew this page, and it's a huge moneymaker for them. Okay, again, they gatekeep, And they are part of a modern church that doesn't want you to talk about modern churches. So Jenny McGrew and Jake McGrew, maybe we'll do a video about them soon about this whole idea, because this is a really, really deep topic and it needs to be talked about. Because as gatekeepers who run a modern church, they don't, it's funny that they're a part of a modern church like Hillsong Elevation, and that's why they won't let you talk about shit like that, because they don't want anybody having a negative view or coming out with a different opinion on what they want you to have an opinion on. So Jenny and Jake McGrew, let's get into the next section here. The money. We got to talk about the money. We'll go back to the idea of coveting. So as a worship pastor, you go to these other churches like Hillsong Elevation, Bethel, North Point, and you go into these places and you realize, my annual budget's about, what was my annual budget at my church? I think it was like $100,000, which is pretty good. Maybe a little bit more. These annual budgets at these churches, let's take North Point for example. When I went, it was $36 million. Not for just the tech, the whole church. And their tech budgets are in the millions, $4 to $5, $6, $10 million a year to upgrade their tech. A lot of these churches recycle their tech every 5 years. Oh, that's the new thing. Get it. Oh, you should see they have like broadcast studios that would rival that of like CNN, Fox News, and like any major cable network, and likely better. Okay, likely better. And they spend millions of dollars on cameras, on lighting, on smoke, on like soundproofing, on anything. So the money is really, really important because these churches bring in tons and tons of money. I think North Point might even be at $40 to $50 million a year now. I think Hillsong, and that's okay, but think about that. That's across 5 churches, I think, in that region. Hillsong is something like 11 million per church, depending on the size. These churches run at massive, massive budgets, and most churches can't achieve that. And so us as worship leaders who look up to these other churches for what to do, we can never, ever, ever achieve what those churches do because we don't have the budgets for it. And every church budget, 60% of those budgets are on salaries. Bigger churches, more so. Okay, a lot of lead pastors of big churches won't take salaries, but what they do, here's how they make their money, is they write books and they sell them to congregations. And then they go do guest appearances at other churches and other events, and they make hundreds of thousands of dollars for one appearance. And they trade off. So, hey, we want Andy Stanley to come to Elevation, here's $150,000. Okay, well, then we're going to get Stephen Furtick to come to an Elevation, and we're going to trade that. That's $150,000 out of our coffers in his pocket. The churches use creative ways to pay each other, and it's like this one big boys club. It really is. And it's crazy how much money churches spend. And what's even crazier is how much money churches waste. Even at my small church with I think an annual budget of $2.5 million, there was so much waste. Like, if you go to North Point on Sunday, they have a massive team on Sunday. Every single person that serves on that Sunday, most of them are paid. And they all get a hot breakfast. They all get they spend so much money. And I like that. I like honoring volunteers and workers. I'm not against it. I'm just saying there is so much money wasted. There's a lot of money stolen from churches that you guys are never going to hear about. There's a lot of things stolen, equipment stolen. Even my church, people would steal headphones. They would steal speakers. They would steal shit because a lot of churches don't even know what the hell they have. And they run through staff so much, it's hard to keep track of everything. So there's a ton of money wasted in churches and there's a ton of money spent. Imagine a church with a $50 million a year budget. What the hell are you spending that on? And a lot of that, 10% of that goes to missions or local, and hardly any of it, rarely goes back into local communities, which is why I think the modern church, as it starts to collapse, and it will, I think the churches that are emerging are now going to become real community churches where everything is run to that church. They exist to support the community they are in, meaning poor people, right? Homeless people, single moms, single dads, and all those things. They should literally exist to serve those people. That is what a church is for. Not to bring in $1 million trillion and buy the biggest tech and have $1,000 shoes and all that shit. That's not what churches are for. And you're seeing this modern church era is collapsing, and I'm here for it. So, sorry. Let's talk about, again, we talked about the gatekeepers. We did a little bit. That's my next line. Gatekeepers like Jenny McGrew, Jake McGrew, and a lot of the gatekeepers also fall into the categories of worship, music, radio, and things you want to do. But radio has kind of gone to the wayside. So the gatekeepers have kind of had to shift. But that's why you're seeing really, really smaller, mid-sized churches come up with really great music. Okay. Hillsong, Elevation, Bethel, all this song have amazing music, but there are churches out there that have even better music that you're never, ever, ever going to hear because it's still gatekept by Spotify and by everybody else because they're still using the same music they used for the last 10 years. That's why Chris Tomlin is worth, I don't even know, $15 million, $20 million. Any given Sunday, Chris Tomlin probably makes $100,000 because so many people are playing a song. Same with Hillsong, same with Bethel Elevation. They're making money because every time I played a song from CCM, I paid that artist. I paid that writer. I paid that church. Well, my church did. Through these fees, CCLI fees. We had to register every year. I take my song, I put it in the CCLI list, what I did, and we submit that and we pay a fee to play that music. Okay? You go to a church on Sunday, there's so much money that goes into a Sunday morning service that they're paying out because you have to be compliant. And there are so many churches who are not compliant. They don't know they're breaking the law. Some of them are playing music over the speakers they're not supposed to play. A lot of people just are ignorant, but they're not. And so the gatekeepers are people that they've been a gatekeeper for the longest time, and it's slowly starting to release, which is great because there's some amazing music out there that you would never even hear of, and I'm glad that people are starting to hear it now, and I love it. Let's talk about the worship club. Okay, in my region, there's something called WRW, and it's a place where all these churches come together. And I showed you footage of that a long time ago. And all these worship leaders from every denomination come together and pull this huge concert together. But at the top of that is like 10 people in my region where the worship leaders are all like the top worship leaders. It's like, again, it's like baseball teams. You got your ace pitcher, it's your worship leader. Churches are often grown by having amazing pastors and amazing worship leaders. Not saying I was amazing. Okay, I wasn't the best in the region. I wasn't the best singer. I wasn't the best musician. But we had the best Sundays because we were like cutting edge. We did everything the way that Elevation and Bethel and all those churches were doing. We were mirroring them and we were succeeding. Most churches couldn't do that because they couldn't hire someone like me who was a unicorn. I could do everything. Video production, music production, arrangements. I could do everything. And so I don't exist. And when I do exist, I get poached by bigger churches. That's how it works. And so, where was I going with that? And so that's the club, right? Everybody wants to be like you. And so smaller churches will come to your medium church and say, how do you do all this? And you're like, well, let me show you. We're going to buy you guys lunch. We're going to take you around. And I would fall into that. Hey, I'm so glad I'm being coveted right now. Don't get it twisted. Worship leaders, when you go to another church who's doing it right, those people are prideful. And they love the fact that you're coming to learn from them because you're doing it right. It is such a gross, untalked about thing, and it needs to be talked about more. It's really gross because it's like, yeah, look what we have, and we're so amazing. And it's such a culture of like almost like high school cliques, right? If you go to a church that's pretty modern and you don't fit into like their molds, you don't belong, and you don't ever get to be a part of the thing. I tried my hardest to make sure everybody was included, and that's because I was never included. And so, but I was also wanted to be a part of the cool clique. And so I would go to these conferences and try to like merge and mingle with these people and say, like, I have the skills that you have. Let's talk. And like, I looked cool. I did the show. I looked the way I was supposed to look and all that. Stupid. But it's part and parcel, but it's not inclusive. You ever go to a modern church? Most people leave modern churches because they are not accepted. They are not welcome to the worship team because they're not good enough. It is a club. If you're not good enough, if you don't play on their level, you're out. There's this Instagram called Do Better Church. You guys need to go take a look at it. It's all about a lot of people were saying like, I was never invited. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. Church. A lot of churches will they need volunteers on worship teams, but if you're not good enough, they're like, hey, we need people in the nursery or parking or bathroom cleaning. And people want to be on that team. And a lot of people want to be on the stage because they want to be on the stage, not for the right reasons. So I would often put lesser talents on that stage because they had the humble heart, and then kick off or not allow those people who I knew wanted to be on stage because they wanted to be there to be on stage. So it is definitely a club, and some pastors get it right, but most modern mega churches, it's every person you see on a stage at North Point or Hillsong Elevation Bethel, they are all paid, and they're all paid very well. None of them are volunteers. All right. Let's talk about auditions. Oh yeah. I hate auditions. I was the kind of guy that, again, just talked about it. I was not always accepted, okay, in my whole life. And so I was always trying to make sure people were included. I was often excluded because I was poor, I couldn't afford it, or whatever the case, wasn't talented enough. And that was all my life through everything. And so when I became a pastor and I became the place that people wanted to come to, I vowed to be that guy that was inclusive. If you weren't good enough, we were going to help you get there. But you had to work to get there. Someone came on stage and sang, and I was like, oh my God, that's cringy. I would never say no. I'd say, hey, it's not for now, but how can we get you to that level? Okay, how can we get you there? I'm never going to say no to somebody because if someone wants to do that for the right reasons, I'm going to help you do that. But most churches hold audition processes, and this is part of worship wars that's really, really difficult because as a worship pastor, you have the shittiest job to tell people who are passionate about music that they're not good and that they can't sing on the stage with you. And that is actually I think it's right, to be honest with you. I was a person who held excellence in high regard. Our church was, most churches like that are excellence over God. No kidding. Excellence, then God. Because they're like, oh God, excellence. And so I was like, okay, but you have to understand this. You go to a modern church who's trying their best to put across the best music and all that stuff, and you have someone up there who can't sing, that is going to be distracting. So we would often use the excuse, it's distracting. And it really is. Same with a lot of people who see girls who are wearing tight-fitted clothing and they're busty or whatever, or they're not wearing appropriate things, and it's distracting, right? It shouldn't be, because you should be able to control your own damn feelings, guys. Chill. This whole purity culture is still very, very, very relevant, specifically when it comes to worship ministry as well. Go on right now, go to Elevation, Hillsong, Bethel Music on YouTube right now, the newest releases, and look at the way the women dress. Some of them don't care, but some of them, like, you see it. Like, it's a lot of like, are you wearing a potato sack, but with like a hat? I guess it's fashionable, but it's one of the hardest parts of being a worship pastor is telling people they can't. So you get people like, I want to be in the worship team. I'm new to the church. I'm like, okay, come on out Tuesday. Love to hear what you have. And so they come out for the rehearsal. They hear it. I bring them up on stage and said, let's hear what you got. And a week or two before, I'd give them a song to work on. We'd play that song for them, and they'd belt it out. I'd usually have my wife and a couple of people I trusted, and we would make a choice. Right? I'd be like, oh, great. I'll be in touch. Generally, if someone wasn't good enough, I would work with them, because that's what you're supposed to do. That's how you make disciples. That's what you're supposed to do. Most worship leaders of churches, even mid-level churches, will just tell people no, bye, thank you, no thanks. A lot of it's clubs. They invite their friends in, and they're all part of this really tight-knit club that you can't get in. It's really, really hard. The club is gross, and the church is so bad. Specifically modern churches, it's very cliquey. And here's the thing. I was talking to my friend the other day, and she said the reason I stopped going to church for a long time because as soon as college was over, there's no more programs for single women. And here's the thing, there isn't. If you are a single woman at a church, not a dude, I'm singling out women, you don't belong anywhere. There's nothing for you. Okay, unless you want to work on a minute. There are some, very rarely, but most single women phase out of churches because there's nothing for them. And I feel like churches should change that. If you really want to meet somebody, the churches should be where you damn meet it. If you should have a dating ministry at your church. I didn't think that you used to. I used to think that was stupid. Now I'm like, why wouldn't you? That should be the place you're meeting your spouse. If you're looking for like-minded people, do whatever it takes to get that. But if you're a woman who does not have children or married, you are not part of modern churches. Modern churches are driven towards families. Okay? They generally try to bring the men in. And it's weird. I know you're like, what? Because men will bring their families. Women who come to church might not bring their families. But if you attract a man to your church, the whole family's coming, right? So again, that was one thing that really happened. I'd lose a lot of single females because the college age are because they don't want to be the church because there's nothing for them there. So the club thing at church is real. It is real. And it's generally between people with kids, like-minded and same ages, and then like men who do things like men's ministries, and then like older ladies who have been married and kids and empty nesters who do all the cooking and all that shit and knitting and whatever. So there's this one glaring obvious hole, and a lot of churches are just like, they don't give a shit. And I hate it. Old versus young. Huge thing. I touched on this at the beginning. They like the way the music was at the old. And so they complain, and they're the ones who raise a stink and like, I tithe here, I'm going to leave. If you have enough people, like the most churches' money, okay, most tithing in most churches comes from 10% of the audience. Okay. And of that 10%, 80% of that are elderly people who tithe because they think it's important. They've done it their whole life. Most young people aren't tithing anymore. Churches are going to collapse in the next 20 years because nobody's going to give them money, and they shouldn't. And so that's really important to churches, to keep old people happy. And how do they do that? Specifically with music, is that you mix and match. But often you're going to get younger people who are like, I don't like the old shit. It's garbage. Right? So you have to really, really play that off. But what I did was I played old music and I modernized it. I still didn't like it. But I just find that it's really, really difficult to have a really, really mixed bag church. If you're ever going to get into ministry, and please don't, but if you ever are, find a church that's new. So they don't have all these legacy olds who are sitting there complaining about everything. But I absolutely had respect for the older people. I loved them. I think they were amazing, not because they tithed, but because they have a lot of wisdom to give. And so a lot of churches are missing the mark by kicking out old people and not giving anything to them and like letting them leave. And they don't give a shit. So that's kind of part of the worship wars that really hit me, because I wanted to be inclusive for everybody, and it's really difficult to do that. This one here is kind of a two-parter. So it's letting people go and burning out the good ones. Okay, so as a worship leader, as a worship pastor, part of my job is to obviously bring on volunteers. I worked at a church that I oversaw over 103 volunteers on our worship team. Okay, 103. We had 3 stages, 3 bands every Sunday. That's like 15 people a Sunday. So I needed a huge rotation of people because nobody wants to serve every Sunday. Some people are like, I want to serve every other Sunday or every third Sunday. And you had to it was a shit show. Not going to lie. It was crazy. Scheduling as a worship pastor is the most stressful thing in the world. You schedule out for like 3 or 4 months. You let it all settle. You get it all done. It's like freaking, it's insane. Okay, you use good programs to do it and all that. I think Planning Center, amazing stuff that they have out there. But then week comes up, oh, someone's sick or someone doesn't want to do it or they left the church and it just gets so effing stressful. I think one of the major things for worship pastors for like burnout is people who shirk their responsibility or who who volunteer to do the thing and then they back off of it. And they're like, I don't want to do it anymore. Just assholes. Just people who don't give a shit. And it sucks. It's one of the things that really stresses most worship pastors out. So part of worship wars is like letting people go. So there are people often that will they come on like once a month and then they keep skipping. You're like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to put you on anymore. A lot of times I wouldn't tell them. And then they call me like 6 months like, hey, I haven't been on the schedule in a while. Yeah, a-hole, because you haven't played in a while. Because you keep canceling, dickweed. I didn't say that. I wanted to. And most worship pastors want to. They won't, but they want to. Right? So you have to let people go. Somebody who, I think I had a worship leader who was dating the sound tech guy, and she admitted on stage that they stayed at a hotel in Niagara Falls and didn't realize what she had said because they weren't married, and then had to boot her off the team. My pastor pulled me aside and said, you have to kick her off. Had to kick her off the team because she admitted out loud that she stayed at a hotel with her boyfriend. And she told me they didn't do anything. That's just, they say to save money. They had separate beds. Didn't matter. Church made me kick them off the team. There's a guy, I'm going to bring him on someday. We've been talking about it a lot. And him and his wife had broken up, and it was just, whenever there's a divorce, it always gets messy. As soon as they divorced, pastor's like, take them both off. They were both worship leaders. Get rid of them for now. Get them off. Just remove them. And then he came out as homosexual, and he was literally bi. Church is like, nope, get lost. And he was a really talented worship leader, and I had to tell him to get lost. So that's really, really difficult. The other thing that happens is burning out the good ones. So as a worship pastor, I'm happy to play every Sunday. It's my job. I love it. I want to do it anyway. And sometimes you got to take a break, and sometimes you got to let people take over who aren't very talented. Okay? And you have to let those people go, or you just have to rely on less than talented people to take your position while you're gone, or put them on a stage because you need to go somewhere else. And that really sucked because it's crazy. If you have one bad Sunday, you hear about it for so long. But when you get a good one, it's so difficult not to burn them out as a worship pastor because you rely on them heavily, and they're usually really talented and they're usually really humble, and you want to keep them. But you, like most of the time in and I'm only talking about volunteer positions. I swear to God, if I could go back and I found a good one, it's just like pay that person. Just pay them. Just give them money. If that's what's going to keep them, pay them. But for volunteer churches like mine, you end up burning out your good ones. And then you have to rely on your shitty ones, unfortunately. And that's just the way it goes. And that pulls you really hard because you don't want to burn them out, but you have really no choice. And so burning out volunteers is one of the things that the church does the most, and it's the most egregious thing churches can do. They never check the health of their volunteers generally. Now, my church didn't, and nobody's ever checking the health of their volunteers. Once every 6 weeks, they might be like, oh, here's a card or happy birthday. Nobody's ever checking on them. I tried my best, but you can't. It's almost impossible. But churches are notorious for burning out volunteers. And then they just, next. I told you why I'm an ex-pastor. The executive pastor was like, that's part of doing business. That's just the way it goes. And it shouldn't be. And that's really, really stressful for a worship leader, a worship pastor, who likes these people, who's built into them, who's taught them, who has built them up, who relies on them. When they say, they come to your office one day, they're like, sorry, I'm out. And that hits you hard because now you got to scramble to fix. And again, going back to one of the most stressful parts of being a worship pastor is scheduling and people crapping out on you. Let's talk about worship pastor versus tech director. Oh, you want to talk about a war. Some churches do it really well. A lot of them are really disconnected, but smaller churches, not really. A lot of times at smaller churches, you get guys who are running sound who have absolutely no business running sound. Running a live sound is actually really, really hard. Specifically at a church like mine, it was in a gym who had these like half circle things on the wall. It was shit. But if you had a good sound tech director who was good at sound, you could make it work, okay? But it's really difficult. You have to understand what compression is. You got to talk about there's EQing and everything else. And if you don't know what you're doing, it sounds like shit. Most churches don't realize that it's not loudness that pisses people off. It's harsh frequencies. If you can get a person there who understands what frequencies hurt and you can actually bring it up by 10 decibels and have it sound pure and perfect as a 10 decibels lower with shitty frequencies hitting people's ears. Most people complain that it's loud. They don't understand that it's just shitty frequencies. So it's always a fight between me and the tech director who puts on a shitty sound guy or whatever the case may be. And some of them are good, but some of them are really bad. Sometimes you look at the schedule, like who's on sound this week, and you look at it, oh, frig. It sucks so bad. And so there's always a war between them because they have to volunteer that out too. They have to build into those people. And here's what churches do. And this is what churches will say. And I was thinking about this the other day and how shitty this is. Leadership of churches will often say this phrase, work yourself out of a job. Could you imagine? I think of that day, I'm like, and I was subscribed to this. I was like, you're right. I need to work myself out of a job. That's because ministry professionals rotate through shit so fast at churches, it's insane. And so what they've done is they built this model of like, work yourself out of a job, build up a volunteer who's better than you so you don't have to do that anymore. AKA, so when you're gone, we have someone to cover your shit. That is one of the most toxic and like spiritually abusive traits of all churches. Work yourself out of a job. It's bullshit. And I hate it. I was thinking about the other day how terrible and how toxic that is. So if you ever hear that at church, and I'm sure a lot of you have, you should tell them to go suck it because that's terrible. Cool. It's never enough. There's a thing, I have a title here called Never Enough. No matter what you do as a worship pastor between the worship wars and how much you pour yourself into it, it's never ever going to be enough. Ministry is you're always left wanting, or you've always left others wanting, because most worship ministry professionals, pastors and worship leaders and all this stuff are always going to be burnt out because they've given themselves so much more than most people, specifically at medium-sized churches. Now, at large churches, it's not the case. You're treated like a rock star, specifically in the States. Canada's different. If I was going to take that job in Florida as a worship leader, I would have been for lack of a better term, you're a god inside of a church. Pastors are treated like gods. They are protected. They are treated like people love you. You're a celebrity. It's crazy, okay? As a worship leader of a larger church, that with the bigger the salary gets, the less you have to do. Okay, so if you're at a church with a huge budget, they generally have someone that covers one job every year. So if someone's just on Pro Presenter, someone's just on planning, someone's just on taking care of volunteers, a worship leader is literally just there to rehearse and play on Sunday. And that's what it would have been my dream job. But it's never enough when you're working at a small or medium church because you're always stretched out and you're always going to leave people wanting, and you're always going to let someone down, you're going to let yourself down, or you're going to burn yourself out. And that's why worship pastors rotate through jobs, I think, even faster than youth leaders now. I'm pretty sure it's faster than youth because a lot of them start small, build until they get better, or they just suck and they stay low, right? It's a poaching system. If a church finds a worship leader who's up and coming, who's very good, they'll poach the shit out of you. They'll take you and they'll offer you more money. Churches have no issue poaching others. My executive pastor at my church poached tons of people. From the job he got fired at from his other church, he poached like 8 of the staff to this church because as a big FU to them. Crazy. Churches are ruthless with poaching. So when you are good, you will be, sought after. But if you're just okay and you're filling the position, that church will use you until you fizzle out, and they don't care, which is burnout, which will happen to me. And there's so much pressure and so much shit going on for worship pastors. That's why I always say in these videos, and I want to make sure I say this clearly, if you know a worship pastor or a pastor in general of some kind in ministry, be their sounding board, be someone they can trust, because they don't have anybody and they need somebody. There's a lot of pressure to be perfect, to live above reproach, and it's really crazy. So if you know somebody in the ministry, be their friend, buy them some dinner or some shit, okay? Cool. All right, we're almost done. I know. This is like my world. I could do another whole video on this. Let's talk about the fakery of the whole worship scene. Now, we touched on Worship Leaders Collective with Jake and Jenny McGrew, who run that shit. To me, that page is like, how do I say this? Like the flagship of fakery. If you're going to gatekeep and tell people what they can and can't talk about, so many churches live in this fake sphere, okay? That's why you're seeing so many pastors fall, because it's all fake. A lot of this is just a big, giant setup to make people rich. Okay, to make people famous, to give narcissists the food that they need. So many churches, specifically modern churches, exist because of main pastors. They exist to be a trophy, to be a shining light of that pastor. And that's fake to me. And so everything that they do and everything they build and everything they do going forward always has to be about them. And worship music is exactly the same. When we idolize worship leaders, like as rock stars, that is absolutely the wrong way to do this. It's so wrong. And so many churches are fake, but you don't see it because you don't see how the sausage is made. So any worship pastor that, like me, that was there, even now, who's devoted fully to their job, okay, would tell you these things. It exists in every single church, and it is very fake. Most churches fake it and never make it. Most churches don't make it. The realest churches are generally the small ones who have thrived for years, who give to their community. Okay. So next time we're going to talk about worship music in general, how much it's worth, and the whole culture of it. Today we talked about the worship wars, the back and forth thing with a little bit of culture mixed in. But now I want to take you guys to church a little bit. And I want to speak specifically to worship leaders, worship pastors and pastors, youth pastors who are watching this video now. And I want to just take you guys to church a little bit. I want to give you permission to do something, okay? If you are serving at a church, have served at a church, have been burned out by a church, have been let go by a church, hurt by a church, or currently serving at a church that you love, or currently serving at a church you hate, I want to give you guys permission to do something, okay? I want to give you permission to yell at the sky, to be angry, to be mad at your leadership, and to hold people accountable. I want you to give you permission to be okay with being unhappy and being angry. So many churches, okay, use this excuse that it's for God, it's for Jesus, and so we have to make all these sacrifices in order to do these things. But they don't need to make those sacrifices. You should never be unhappy if you're doing something for Jesus. There should be, yes, there's going to be trials, there will be tribulations. I agree with that. There should be. There's going to be. But you should never do it at the cost of your family, okay, at the cost of being unhappy, at the cost of serving fake people, at the cost of breaking the law, at the cost of burning yourself out and being useless. Ministry, hear me out, everybody, and this is why I left, because I've never found it. Ministry should be joyous, and it always is for that first 6 months. But the year and a half mark, you're like, oh my gosh. Most pastors at about a year and a half are like, this is bullshit. I hate it. And it's rare you find that, unless you're at a church, again, that's paying you 6 figures to play 4 songs on Sunday, then leave, right? Some people have it really good, and they're going to stay there because they have it really good. But for the most part, it's shit. And I want to give you guys permission to be yourself, to vent, to find somebody to vent to be angry, to be upset, because you have a right to be. Most churches are getting it wrong. Most. If you work at a church and their lead pastor is a narcissist and takes control of everything, that's not how Jesus intended the church to be. Are you working at a church that takes in millions of dollars and gives almost none of it to your community? That's not how churches are supposed to be. Okay? If you work at a church that burns out every effing volunteer they have and just rotates through them like water, that's not how churches are supposed to be, and you should try to change it. Okay? If you work at churches that keep secrets and have non-disclosure agreements, leave that church. You should never be at a place that cannot be held accountable for shit they do. I'm giving you permission. You don't need it from me, but I'm telling you, if you don't have someone, if you don't have a person that you can vent to, find a person, because you're going to eventually leave ministry and you're going to hate it like I did. I didn't have a person. Find a person, and not your spouse. I mean, find a dude that doesn't even go to church, that has no vested interest. Go for beers and yell at the sky. And go out and say, I effing hate this. And here's what I hate about it. Get it all out. You are allowed to be upset. And I think, and a lot of pastors feel guilty when they are upset about their shitty existence inside of churches who are shit. Sometimes somebody needs to tell you, you have permission to be a human being. And I want you guys to know that that's kind of what I do on the Burnt Out Pastor. As the Burnt Out Pastor, I have another channel. I'm going to put this on there too. But you should realize that you're either going to stick with it and be miserable, and then you're going to become useless to the ministry. But find a place and hold your leadership accountable when they are doing shitty things. More people need to do it. More people need permission to do it. You, take it from me, a person who was in it for 10 years and who left. I should have held my leadership more accountable. I tried, but I should have done it more. If that means leaving, it means you leave. Leadership is never, ever held accountable until it gets too far. Driscoll and all these shitty ass pastors who have gone, Zacharias, all these guys we find out about shit later. Hillsong, frickin' Carl Lentz, all this shit will get out of hand eventually. And if you know that shit is going down and you don't say anything about it, you're a little bit responsible. So, hopefully this helps you. Find a person, vent, call people assholes behind their back, do it. I hope this has been interesting for you guys. It's been a long video, but I can talk about ministry forever. So that's my life. That's what I lived. And if you're interested, go check out Why I'm an Ex-Pastor series. It is a very intriguing series about part of my life. And it's still, again, when I see the songs I was playing, I miss it. I do miss it. I'm not going to lie. It's part of my life that I'm not angry I did it. I'm actually super happy and I was very proud of what I did. But there's some shit in churches that I let slip and I was a part of that I'm not very happy. And I shouldn't have been. That's the way it is. Take a deep breath. You are incredible, valuable, gorgeous, beautiful. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And if you go to church, please be someone who's in ministry's best friend. Again, that's just really important. I hope you guys have an amazing day. I'll see you tomorrow.